"Ma'am, I think you're in the wrong seat." The words were soft, almost polite, but they landed with a precision that cut through the hum of laughter and clinking glasses, and for a second, everything around Ava Brooks seemed to slow, the golden chandelier light above her flickering gently against polished marble floors, as if even the room itself was holding its breath, because she hadn't even sat down yet, her hands still resting lightly on the back of the chair, fingers steady, posture composed, while the woman beside the table offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile that suggested correction without kindness, invitation without belonging, and across the room, a few heads turned just enough to notice, not openly staring, just enough to confirm what they already believed, that she did not fit into the carefully curated symmetry of white silk dresses, tailored tuxedos, and generational wealth wrapped in effortless confidence. And Ava felt it, not as a sharp sting, but as something colder, something familiar, like walking into air-conditioned silence after standing too long in the sun, her skin registering the shift before her mind even named it. Because this wasn't new. Not really. Not the way conversations subtly redirected when she approached, not the way servers hesitated half a second longer before offering her a drink, not the way laughter dimmed just slightly as she passed, like a song being turned down instead of off. And still, she stood there, her black dress simple but elegant, the fabric catching just enough light to show care without demanding attention, her shoulders relaxed, her chin neither lifted in defiance nor lowered in apology, just steady, as if she had learned long ago that presence didn't need permission, even when the room insisted otherwise. And somewhere behind her, a chair scraped softly against the floor, a quiet adjustment, someone choosing distance without making a scene, and Ava's gaze moved across the reception hall, taking in the towering floral arrangements, the soft string quartet playing near the stage, the tall windows framing a late summer sky, fading into dusk, everything arranged with meticulous intention, every detail curated to signal perfection. And yet beneath it all, there was an undercurrent she could feel, something unspoken but undeniable, a line drawn without words, a boundary enforced through glances and silence rather than rules. And for a brief moment, her grip on the chair tightened just slightly, not enough for anyone to notice, just enough for her to feel it. The quiet reminder that she could leave, that it would be easier, cleaner, more comfortable for everyone if she simply stepped back, turned around, and let the evening continue without disruption. But she didn't move, not yet, because in her other hand, held gently between her fingers, was the invitation, thick cardstock, embossed lettering, her name printed clearly in ink that had not hesitated, had not questioned, had not erased her. And she looked down at it for just a second, just long enough to ground herself in something real, something undeniable, before lifting her eyes again to the room that seemed determined to forget she was meant to be here at all. And somewhere near the front, just beyond the soft glow of the stage lights, the groom stood waiting, unaware that the air behind him had shifted, that the story unfolding in the quiet edges of his wedding was about to reach him, and that a name, once spoken, would change everything. Someone laughed softly near the bar, not loud enough to draw attention, but just enough to ripple through the space like a quiet agreement. And Ava knew that sound, knew the way it carried without needing words, the way it confirmed what the room had already decided about her long before she ever stepped inside. And still she did not turn toward it, did not search for the source, because she had learned that some things were not meant to be confronted, only endured, her eyes instead drifting toward the far corner where the service staff moved in practiced silence, their black uniforms blending into the edges of the room, invisible in the way they were expected to be. And for a moment, she felt the strange pull of that space, the familiarity of it, the quiet rhythm of people who worked without being seen, because that was where she had first learned how to exist in rooms like this, not as a guest, but as someone passing through, someone temporary, someone whose presence was tolerated as long as it remained unnoticed. And the memory came back with a clarity that surprised her, the scent of lemon polish on hardwood floors, the low hum of a vacuum down a long hallway, her mother's voice soft but steady as she reminded her to stay close, to stay quiet, to never touch anything that did not belong to them, because this house, this same family, had once been a place where Ava stood in the background holding a folded cloth, watching from doorways, learning the shape of a world that would never claim her as its own. And now here she was again, older, composed, dressed in something that allowed her to stand among them without explanation. And yet the feeling had not changed, the subtle shift in air when she entered, the way people adjusted without acknowledging it, the way space rearranged itself around her as if guided by something unspoken but deeply understood. And she let out a slow breath, barely visible, grounding herself in the present as the music swelled slightly. A violin carrying a melody that floated just above the conversations, delicate and controlled, much like everything else in this room. And then she noticed the table settings, each place card carefully arranged in neat rows, names printed in elegant script. And her eyes moved across them until they found it. Her name, Ava Brooks, placed among the others as if it belonged there without question, without hesitation. And for a moment, something shifted inside her. Not relief, not quite, but recognition, a quiet confirmation that she had not imagined it, that she had not misunderstood, that she had been invited here intentionally. And yet the reality around her did not reflect that truth, because invitations could be sent without acceptance, names could be written without acknowledgement, and belonging required more than ink on paper. It required something this room had not yet given her. And as she reached out and gently touched the edge of the card, aligning it slightly with the plate in front of it, a small, almost instinctive gesture, she felt eyes on her again, sharper this time, more focused, as if her simple act of claiming that space had crossed an invisible line. And she did not look up immediately, did not react, allowing the silence to stretch for just a second longer, because she understood something they did not, something she had carried with her long before this night. That presence, true presence, did not need to be announced, it only needed to remain, steady and undeniable, until the moment came when the truth could no longer be ignored. You should not touch that. The voice was quieter than before, but this time it carried weight, the kind that did not ask for attention, yet still managed to pull it. And Ava paused with her fingertips still resting lightly against the edge of the place card, her name written in elegant ink that now felt suddenly heavier under her touch, as if even the letters themselves were being questioned. And when she lifted her gaze, she saw Charlotte Whitmore standing just a few feet away, her posture perfectly composed, shoulders relaxed, chin slightly raised, every detail of her presence aligned with the image of someone who had never once had to justify her place in a room like this, her white gown catching the soft light in a way that seemed effortless, almost rehearsed. And for a moment, the music continued, the violin still weaving its gentle melody through the air, but the conversations nearby began to thin, voices lowering, glances shifting, attention gathering in subtle waves around them, and Charlotte's smile appeared, controlled and precise, the kind designed for photographs and polite introductions. Yet beneath it there was something else, something firmer, something that did not bend. Those seats are assigned, she said, her tone even, not unkind, but not open either. And Ava let her hand fall slowly to her side, not in retreat, but in acknowledgement of the moment, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady, because she understood what this was, not a correction, not really, but a quiet reinforcement of lines that had been drawn long before tonight. And for a second, neither of them moved, the space between them holding more than just silence, holding expectation, judgment, history that only one of them fully carried. And somewhere behind Charlotte, a guest leaned slightly closer to another, whispering something that did not need to be heard to be understood, and Ava felt it again. That familiar shift, that tightening of space that suggested she had already overstayed a welcome she had been given on paper, but not in practice. And still, she did not step back, her gaze meeting Charlotte's without challenge, without apology, just presence, steady and grounded. And when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, measured, the kind that did not seek to convince, only to state. "My name is on this table," she said, not raising her tone, not emphasizing the words, just letting them exist as fact. And Charlotte's smile did not fade, but it did change, just slightly. A fraction of a second where something like irritation flickered beneath the surface before being smoothed away. "I am sure there has been some kind of mistake," she replied, her eyes briefly dropping to the card before returning to Ava, and around them. The room seemed to lean in without moving, attention tightening like a drawn thread, because moments like this were not meant to happen here, not in a place where everything was planned, controlled, perfected. And yet here it was, unfolding quietly in the open, and Ava felt the weight of it settle, not as pressure, but as clarity. Because she had seen this before, in different forms, in different rooms. The way certainty could be dismissed simply because it came from someone like her. The way truth required validation when it should have stood on its own. And she did not argue, did not explain, did not offer more than what had already been said, because she knew something they did not, something that sat quietly beneath the surface of this entire evening, waiting for its moment. And as Charlotte turned her head slightly, signaling with a subtle glance toward a nearby staff member, the kind of silent instruction that did not need words, Ava remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence unshaken, as if she understood that whatever was about to happen next had already been set in motion long before either of them spoke, and that the truth, once it arrived, would not ask for permission to be heard. The staff member approached with careful steps, his expression neutral in the way of someone trained not to take sides, only to resolve discomfort. And he stopped just short of the table, glancing briefly at Charlotte before turning to Ava with a polite nod that carried a quiet expectation. "Ma'am, can I help you find your seat?" he asked, his tone respectful, but already leaning toward conclusion, as if the answer had been decided before the question was spoken. And Ava noticed the way his hands were held loosely in front of him, not blocking her path, not forcing movement, just guiding it. The kind of gesture that suggested cooperation rather than confrontation. And for a moment, the room seemed to settle into a rhythm that felt rehearsed, like this scene had played out before in different forms, different faces, always ending the same way. The outlier gently redirected, the order restored without disruption. And somewhere behind them, a glass clinked softly, laughter resumed in fragments, cautious at first, then growing, as if people were testing whether it was safe to return to normal. And Ava let her gaze move past the staff member for just a second, taking in the room again, the polished surfaces, the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off crystal, the carefully arranged perfection that depended on everything and everyone staying exactly where they were expected to be. And she understood what was being asked of her, not directly, not openly, but clearly enough to step away, to make this easier, to allow the evening to continue without the quiet tension her presence had introduced. And her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the table once more, not gripping it, not claiming it, just acknowledging it, as if grounding herself in something tangible before making a choice. And when she spoke, her voice remained calm, steady, carrying no trace of resistance, only certainty. "I am already where I am supposed to be," she said, and the staff member hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, his eyes shifting down to the place card, then back to her, as if weighing protocol against what was physically in front of him. And Charlotte's posture tightened ever so slightly, a subtle shift in her shoulders that only someone watching closely would notice, the kind of adjustment that signaled control being tested, not lost, but challenged in a way that was unfamiliar. And the air between them grew thinner, quieter, the music continuing in the background, but no longer filling the space the same way, because attention had narrowed again, focused, waiting. And Ava did not move, did not step forward or back, her presence steady, unyielding in its simplicity. And for a brief moment, something flickered across the staff member's face, uncertainty, not about who she was, but about what he was supposed to do next, because the situation did not fit neatly into the roles he had been given. And Charlotte exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly, before speaking again, her tone still composed, but now carrying a faint edge. "Beneath the surface, there must be another table for you," she said, not looking at the card this time, as if acknowledging it would give it weight she was not willing to grant. And Ava felt the words settle, not as an insult, but as a decision being made in real time, one that attempted to reshape reality to match expectation. And still, she did not argue, did not raise her voice, did not offer explanation, because she knew something neither of them did, something that existed just beyond this moment, waiting to enter. And as the staff member shifted his stance slightly, preparing to guide her away despite the uncertainty, Ava's eyes lifted once more toward the front of the room, toward the stage where the ceremony had begun to gather its final moments. And there was a stillness in her that did not match the tension around her, a quiet patience that suggested she was not waiting to be accepted, but waiting for something else entirely, something that would not come from persuasion or permission, but from truth making its way into a room that had not prepared itself to receive it. The staff member shifted his weight forward, just enough to signal the next step, the quiet intention to guide, rather than insist, and his hand lifted slightly, palm open, indicating a direction away from the table as if the path had already been decided and all that remained was for Ava to follow it. And around them, the subtle tension that had been building began to crystallize, no longer hidden beneath polite smiles or softened glances, but present in the stillness of nearby guests who had stopped pretending not to notice, their conversations fading into unfinished sentences, their attention drawn fully now to the moment unfolding in front of them. And Charlotte remained where she was, her posture composed, her expression carefully neutral, yet there was a firmness in the way she held her ground, as if the outcome of this interaction mattered more than the scene it created, and Ava felt the weight of it settle across the space, not as pressure to move, but as a test, quiet and deliberate, asking without words whether she would step aside and allow the evening to continue untouched, and, for a brief second, her gaze dropped to the floor beneath her, the polished marble reflecting fragments of light and shadow, distorted shapes that shifted with every movement around her. And she remembered standing on floors like this as a child, watching reflections instead of faces, learning early that some rooms were easier to navigate when you did not meet anyone's eyes, when you became part of the background, something that passed through without leaving a mark. And yet here she was now, no longer that child, no longer invisible unless she chose to be. And when she lifted her head again, there was no hesitation in her expression, no uncertainty in the way she held herself, just a quiet clarity that seemed to anchor her in place. And the staff member hesitated again, his hand lowering slightly, as if unsure whether to continue or withdraw, caught between instruction and reality. And Charlotte's voice came once more, softer this time, but carrying a sharper edge beneath its calm surface. "This is not the place for confusion," she said, her eyes fixed on Ava, not unkind, but unwavering, and the words lingered in the air, heavier than their tone suggested, because they were not about the table, not really, but about order, expectation, the invisible structure that held the room together. And Ava heard it, understood it fully, the meaning beneath the surface, the implication that her presence itself was the disruption, and still, she did not respond immediately, allowing the silence to stretch, to deepen, until it pressed gently against the edges of the moment, and then, with a small, almost imperceptible inhale, she spoke again, her voice steady, grounded. "There is no confusion," she said, and nothing more, no explanation, no defense, just the statement left to exist on its own, and the effect was subtle but undeniable, a shift in the air, a pause that did not resolve itself quickly, because certainty, when delivered without force, had a way of unsettling those who expected resistance or retreat, and the staff member's eyes moved once more to the place card, then back to Ava, and something in his posture changed, not a decision, not yet, but a hesitation, that had not been there before, and Charlotte's composure held, but only just, the smallest tightening at the corner of her eyes betraying the effort it took to maintain control of a situation that was no longer unfolding as cleanly as expected. And beyond them, near the front of the room, the music softened, the ceremony drawing closer to a transition, voices shifting, attention beginning to turn toward the stage. And Ava felt it, that subtle pull, that quiet alignment of timing and truth, as if the moment she had been waiting for was moving toward her just as steadily as she had remained in place. And for the first time since the tension began, she allowed her gaze to lift fully toward the front, toward the man standing beneath the soft glow of the lights, unaware that everything behind him was about to change in a way no one in the room had anticipated. And Ava did not move, did not step away, because she knew that leaving now would not restore order, it would only delay what was already on its way. Something larger than discomfort, larger than expectation, something that would not be redirected or dismissed, but revealed in a way that would leave no space for doubt. The music softened until it was almost not there, the final notes of the violin stretching thin across the air before dissolving into a silence that felt deliberate, like the room itself had decided to pause. And Ava remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her breathing slow and even, while the weight of everything that had just happened settled into stillness around her, no longer moving, no longer shifting, just present. And for the first time since she had entered the room, no one spoke near her. No whispered comments, no polite redirections, only a quiet that pressed gently against the edges of the moment. And she became aware of the smallest details, the faint hum of the air conditioning above, the soft flicker of candlelight reflecting off glass, the distant sound of a chair being adjusted near the back of the room, all of it sharper now, clearer, as if the world had narrowed to this exact point in time. And she felt it not as tension, but as space, a rare kind of stillness that allowed something deeper to surface, something that had been buried beneath years of quiet endurance. And her eyes lowered slightly, not in retreat, but in reflection, as memories moved through her with a clarity she had not expected. The long hallways of houses she had walked through as a child, her footsteps softened by carpet she was not meant to linger on, her mother's voice reminding her to be careful, to be respectful, to never give anyone a reason to question her presence. And she had carried that with her, that carefulness, that awareness of space and place, shaping herself around rooms that were never designed to hold her fully. And yet, standing here now, she realized something had changed, not in the room, not in the people around her, but in herself, because she was no longer adjusting to fit, no longer shrinking to avoid discomfort. She was simply standing, existing, allowing herself to take up space without asking if it was permitted, and that realization settled into her like a quiet truth, steady and unshakable. And she lifted her gaze again, her eyes moving once more toward the front of the room where the ceremony had reached its final pause, the officiant stepping slightly to the side, the expectation of the next moment hanging in the air. And Ethan stood there, his figure framed by soft light, his attention forward, focused on the script of the evening, unaware of the shift that had taken place behind him, unaware of the silence that had gathered. And Ava watched him, not with anticipation, not with urgency, but with a calm certainty that did not need to rush. Because whatever was about to happen would not be forced into existence, it would arrive on its own, carried by something larger than the tension of this room. And around her, people began to turn their attention back toward the front, their focus drifting away from her in cautious increments, as if they believed the moment had passed, that order had been restored without resolution. And Charlotte remained still for a second longer before finally shifting her stance, her attention also moving forward, the smallest release of control signaling that she believed the situation had been contained. And the staff member stepped back quietly, retreating into the background where he belonged, the role he understood. And Ava did not follow their movement, did not let her presence fade with their attention. She remained grounded, steady, as if rooted in something deeper than the surface of the event. And the silence held just a moment longer before a voice at the front began to speak again, calm, measured, guiding the ceremony forward. And yet beneath that voice, beneath the carefully structured rhythm of the evening, there was something else building, something unseen but undeniable, like a shift in the air before a storm, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but growing, aligning, moving toward a point that could no longer be avoided. And Ava felt it, not with fear, not with doubt, but with recognition, because she had not stayed for acceptance. She had stayed because she knew the truth had not yet been spoken, and when it was, it would not whisper, it would not ask, it would simply arrive, and everything that had been carefully held in place would have no choice but to respond. Wait. The single word cut cleanly through the officiant's voice, not loud, not forceful, but precise enough to stop the next sentence before it could fully form. And the room responded instantly, like a breath held too long finally catching, heads turning in near perfect unison toward the front where Ethan Caldwell stood, his posture no longer aligned with the quiet script of the ceremony, his hands slightly raised as if he had reached for something invisible and found it. And for a moment, no one moved. Not the officiant, not Charlotte, not the guests who had just begun to settle back into their expectations, because something in his tone had shifted, something that did not belong to rehearsed vows or polished tradition. And Ava felt it before she fully understood it, a subtle tightening in the air, a current running through the space that seemed to connect him to something beyond the stage, beyond the moment. And Ethan's gaze moved, not across the crowd in general acknowledgement, but with intention, scanning, searching, as if he had realized something was missing only. Now that he stood at the center of everything, and the silence deepened, stretching longer than comfort allowed, until it began to press against the edges of the room, and then his eyes stopped, fixed on a point behind the rows of guests, past the soft glow of candlelight and polished glass, landing exactly where Ava stood, and for a fraction of a second, his expression shifted, not dramatically, not enough for most to notice, but enough for her to see it clearly, recognition, not sudden, but returning, like something that had always been there just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. And he took a small step forward, the movement subtle but unmistakable, breaking the stillness in a way that could not be undone. And when he spoke again, his voice carried across the room with a clarity that left no space for misinterpretation. "Ava Brooks," he said, her name unfolding into the silence with a weight that transformed it instantly, and the effect was immediate. The air shifting, conversations that had already faded now disappearing completely, every eye turning, not just toward him, but toward her, the name anchoring their attention in a way that no glance or gesture had been able to do before. And Charlotte's posture stiffened beside him, her composure holding but tightening, as if the structure of the evening had been nudged off its axis in a way she could not immediately correct. And the staff member who had stepped back earlier froze mid-motion, his role suddenly uncertain in a situation that no longer followed the expected pattern. And Ava did not move, not yet, her body still, her breath steady, but something inside her shifted, not surprise, not exactly, but a quiet confirmation that what she had felt building had finally arrived. And Ethan's gaze did not waver, did not soften into apology or confusion. It held steady, focused entirely on her, as if the rest of the room had faded into something distant and irrelevant. And he took another step, this time more deliberate, closing the space between himself and the edge of the stage. And the silence that followed was no longer empty. It was filled, charged with the weight of recognition, of something being brought into the open that had not been acknowledged until now. And Ava felt every eye on her, every expectation shifting, every assumption beginning to crack under the simple fact that her name had been spoken, not dismissed, not questioned, but called, clearly and without hesitation. And in that moment, the balance of the room changed, not through force, not through argument, but through truth stepping forward into a space that had not prepared itself to receive it. And nothing, not the music, not the careful arrangements, not the quiet rules that had governed every interaction until now, could pull it back. For a moment, no one breathed, not fully, not freely, as if the entire room had been suspended in that single name. And Ava felt it settle over her, not like a spotlight, but like a weight that had finally found its place. And she lifted her chin just slightly, her eyes meeting Ethan's across the distance, steady, unflinching, while the silence stretched long enough to become something undeniable, something that demanded response. And Ethan did not look away, did not retreat back into the safety of ceremony or expectation. Instead, he stepped down from the raised platform, the soft echo of his shoes against the polished floor carrying farther than it should have, each step measured, deliberate, as if he was moving through something unseen, something that required intention to cross. And Charlotte turned toward him, her expression controlled but no longer composed in the same effortless way, a question forming in the slight parting of her lips, though she did not speak it aloud, because whatever was happening no longer followed the structure she understood. And the guests shifted, some leaning forward, others pulling back, all caught in the quiet gravity of a moment that refused to resolve itself quickly. And Ava remained where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded, as if she had always known this path would lead here. And when Ethan reached the edge of the aisle, he stopped, just a few steps away from her, the space between them now smaller, more defined. And for a second, He said nothing, his gaze holding hers with a depth that suggested memory rather than introduction, recognition rather than discovery. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer, but no less clear. "You stayed," he said. The words simple, yet carrying something far heavier beneath them, something that did not belong to the present alone, and Ava's expression did not shift dramatically, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in her eyes, a subtle release of something long held, not tension, but patience, and she answered just as simply. "I was invited," she said, and the exchange hung in the air, stripped of explanation, stripped of performance, leaving only truth in its most direct form, and Ethan nodded slowly, as if confirming something within himself, something that had been waiting beneath years of distance and silence. And he turned then, not away from her, but slightly, enough for his voice to carry outward to the room, to the people who had watched, judged, dismissed without understanding. "She should never have had to prove she belongs here," he said, not loudly, not accusing, but with a calm certainty that cut deeper than any raised voice could, and the effect was immediate, subtle but unmistakable, a shift in posture, in expression, in the way eyes moved, no longer avoiding Ava, but confronting the reality of her presence in a way they had not allowed themselves to before. And Charlotte's composure tightened, her hands clasping together just a little more firmly, the smallest sign that control was no longer absolute. And the staff member who had tried to guide Ava away lowered his gaze, stepping back fully now. His role dissolved in the wake of something larger than protocol, and Ava stood still. Through it all, not stepping forward, not claiming the moment, allowing it to unfold without force, because this was not about recognition being given, it was about truth being revealed, and she did not need to demand it, did not need to shape it. She only needed to remain present as it settled into the room, reshaping everything it touched. And Ethan turned back to her fully then, his expression no longer guarded, no longer divided between expectation and reality, but aligned, clear, and without hesitation, he extended his hand toward her, not as a gesture of rescue, not as an act of correction, but as something quieter, something rooted in acknowledgement, in respect, in the simple understanding that some truths, once spoken, do not ask for permission to exist, they simply do. And the room, for all its elegance and structure, had no choice now but to make space for it. For a second, Ava did not move, her eyes resting on Ethan's hand, not with hesitation, but with a quiet understanding of what it meant, because this was not about stepping forward into attention, it was about stepping into truth, and slowly, without rush, she lifted her hand and placed it in his, her fingers steady, her touch light but certain, and the moment their hands met, something in the room shifted again, not dramatically, not loudly, but deeply, like a structure settling into a new foundation. And Ethan did not pull her forward quickly, did not make a show of it. He simply turned and walked beside her, guiding her gently toward the front, their steps measured, synchronized without effort, and the soft sound of their movement across the polished floor carried through the silence, marking each second in a way no music could have. And as they moved, the room responded, not with applause, not with words, but with space, chairs adjusting, bodies shifting, a path opening not out of instruction, but out of recognition. And Ava felt it, not as acceptance being granted, but as resistance falling away, piece by piece. And when they reached the front, Ethan stopped, turning to face the room once more, but this time, Ava stood beside him, not behind, not apart, but present in a way that could not be ignored or redefined. And Charlotte remained where she was, her posture still composed, but quieter now, her expression no longer fixed in certainty, her gaze resting briefly on Ava before lowering, not in defeat, but in something closer to reflection, as if she, too, was seeing the moment clearly for the first time. And no one spoke, not the officiant, not the guests, because words would have felt unnecessary, even intrusive, in the presence of something that had already said everything it needed to. And Ava stood there, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing calm, the weight she had carried into the room no longer pressing against her, not because it had disappeared, but because it had been seen, acknowledged, allowed to exist without resistance. and she did not look around for validation, did not search the faces in the crowd for approval or apology, because she understood now that neither was required for her presence to be real, and Ethan's hand remained in hers, not tightening, not pulling, just there, steady, a quiet acknowledgement that did not need to be explained, and after a moment, he released it gently, not as a withdrawal, but as a completion, as if the gesture had served its purpose and no longer needed to hold them in place, and he turned back toward the officiant, the ceremony ready to continue, but not as it had been before, because something fundamental had changed, something that could not be undone or overlooked, and Ava stepped slightly to the side, not retreating, but choosing her place with intention, her presence now integrated into the moment rather than positioned against it, and the light from the chandeliers caught softly along the edges of the room, reflecting in quiet patterns across glass and marble, and the air felt different, not lighter, not heavier, just honest in a way it had not been before, and as the officiant finally spoke again, his voice steady, guiding the ceremony forward, Ava allowed herself a small breath, slow and full, the kind that settles deep and stays, and she stood there, not as someone who had been allowed to remain, but as someone who had never needed permission at all, and in the silence that followed each word, in the stillness that lingered between movements, there was something new, something that could not be measured or named, only felt, like the quiet sound of truth after it has been spoken, steady, present, and impossible to ignore.